Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
At my son's graduation, when he said I did nothing to help him, I clapped like a damn seal in a circus ring. I mean it, palms smacking together so hard, I almost dislocated something. You ever feel your soul tear just a little, like a piece of it gets ripped off and tossed into the air in front of a crowd? That was me, sitting in the fifth row, right behind a family who brought balloons and a banner that said, "We're so proud of you, Sarah." Meanwhile, I just sat there in a wrinkled button-down shirt from JCPenney and a tie that smelled faintly of garage oil and menthols, trying not to choke on my own breath while my kid, my flesh and blood, stood on that stage and erased me from the damn story. Jason looked sharp, I'll give him that. He always knew how to dress like he belonged in rooms that didn't know my name. He was the valedictorian, which meant all eyes were on him, and he soaked it up like a dry sponge hitting warm water. He opened his speech with a joke about caffeine and finals, the kind of safe crowd pleaser that gets nervous chuckles and parent-approved nods. Then he eased into the heartfelt stuff. To my professors, who challenged me, he said, pausing for dramatic effect like someone told him pauses were power. To my friends, who lifted me up. And to those who stood by me and inspired me. I remember leaning forward a little then. Just a bit. Like maybe, just maybe, I'd made the cut. He didn't say my name. And then came the line. I swear to God, it came out smooth and clean like a blade sliding through fabric. "Everything I've achieved," he said, looking out over the audience with this gleam in his eye, this look of almost defiance, "I did without help. This is all me." I couldn't move for a second. My brain just kind of stalled. All me? I sat there with my hands folded and my heart pounding like I was back in basic training, like someone had just kicked open a door in my chest. But then I clapped. Loud as hell. Louder than anyone in that auditorium. Louder than the mom who shrieked when her daughter's name got called. Louder than the kid with the air horn 3 rows down. I clapped like I was proud, like my insides weren't crumbling into dust. There's something real ugly about pride when it's forced out of you like a confession. That clap wasn't for him. It was for me. It was the only damn thing I could do to keep from standing up and shouting. I clapped to stop myself from crying. I clapped because if I didn't, I would have walked out and never looked back. Afterward, in the hallway where families were hugging and taking photos under that cheap-ass "Congratulations, Class of 2024" banner, I stood near the vending machine pretending to scroll through my phone. Jason was posing with some professor who looked like he couldn't lift a shovel if his life depended on it. They laughed together, slapped each other's backs like they'd been through something real together. He didn't look at me once. Not even when I caught his eye for a second. He just looked through me, like I was the janitor or some random parent from a different kid's life. I left without saying a word. Didn't even wait for him to find me. Drove home in silence. Didn't put on the radio. Didn't call anybody. Just rolled down the window and let the wind scream at me while I chewed on everything that speech stirred up. Memories hit harder when you're alone and pissed off. I remembered taping up his cleats with duct tape in 8th grade because we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered sleeping in my truck after working 2 doubles just so I wouldn't miss his school presentation the next morning. I remembered skipping meals, selling tools, letting go of promotions, things he never knew about, things I never told him because that's just not how I was raised. You do what you do, and you shut the hell up about it. But Jason, he stood up there and took all the credit like I was a goddamn ghost. Like I didn't bleed to make sure he had the life I never got. 2 weeks later, I got even. But not in the way you think. People think being a parent means birthdays and barbecues, report cards stuck on the fridge, smiling pictures at the zoo, and hugging your kid after the big game whether he wins or not. But that's the kind of shit you see in insurance commercials and sitcoms with laugh tracks and studio lighting. Not real life with cold paychecks and colder mornings when you've barely slept and your back hurts so bad from pulling night shifts that you can't feel your legs by noon. See, the truth they never show is quieter, dirtier, meaner, and it's made up of the things you give up, not the ones you get to keep. That's what fatherhood was for me. It wasn't teaching Jason how to shave or tossing footballs in the yard. It was working 18 hours straight, coming home to a sink full of dishes, and collapsing on a busted couch that still smelled like the dog we had to give away after Susan left. It was skipping the steak dinner I'd dreamed of all week just so he could buy a graphing calculator for pre-calc, because apparently the one from Walmart wasn't good enough. It was going to work on Christmas Eve and New Year's Day, because holidays don't mean shit when your gas bill's overdue and your kids applying to colleges that cost more per semester than I made in 3. I turned down promotions more than once. Real ones, too, supervisor spots that came with benefits and a little more dignity. But those jobs would have had me traveling or managing crews out of town, and I couldn't afford to not be around. Jason never knew that. He just saw me as the guy who fixed the sink, drove the old Chevy that coughed like it had emphysema, and smelled like oil and burnt coffee. There were nights I didn't sleep at all, like none. I'd finish a late shift, nap in the truck wrapped in an old army blanket, and then show up at his school like I'd been awake for hours, clapping like an idiot at some science fair or awards ceremony. There was a time, his junior year, I'd been coughing up blood for days, figured it was bronchitis or maybe something worse. I went to urgent care, got poked and tested, and the doctor said I should be admitted overnight. But Jason had a regional debate that weekend, and he was finally excited about something, so I signed myself out and stood in the back of that high school gym, wheezing like an old radiator, pretending I felt fine. I clapped when they called his name. I always clapped. He was smart. Smarter than me, smarter than most. He had this sharpness about him, a kind of precision that made you think he could cut through the world if he wanted to. But he was cold, even as a kid. Not cruel, not rude, just distant. He never ran into my arms or called me dad with that big cheesy smile like you see in Hallmark movies. He was quiet, independent, always reading or building things or arguing about something. I thought it was just teen angst or maybe a phase, and I figured he'd grow out of it. He never did. By the time Jason turned 16, I had already spent nearly $75,000 on tuition, books, and everything in between, money I didn't even have, mind you. That number was probably off, if we're being honest, because who the hell keeps receipts for things like heartbreak and skipping your own dreams? But I ran the math once on a scratch pad during a slow night at work, and that's the figure I came up with. And before someone in the comments jumps down my throat, yeah, I know, he wasn't even in college yet at 16. Don't get your khakis in a twist. The point is, I poured everything into that kid, long before he hit 18. But I never told him any of it. Not because I wanted to be a martyr or get a goddamn medal, but because I was raised to believe that being a man meant shutting up and doing your job. You don't tell your kid you're suffering. You let them think the lights always stay on by magic, and the fridge fills itself, and somehow the rent gets paid even when your boots are falling apart. That's what my old man did, and even though he wasn't perfect, hell, far from it, I figured he had the right idea. Jason probably thought I was just some boring old mechanic who never had dreams of his own. What he never saw were the guitar strings I stopped replacing, the notebooks I stopped writing in, or the half-finished truck I stopped restoring because all my time and money went to him. I made peace with that until the day he stood up in front of hundreds of people and erased me from his story like I was a typo. I drove myself crazy the night after graduation. Sat in the garage in the same chair I used to rock him to sleep in when Susan bailed, staring at the oil stains on the concrete and asking myself where the hell I went wrong. Was it the way I raised him? Was I too hard, too silent, too practical? Maybe I should have hugged him more. Maybe I should have told him I was proud more often, or even just said I love you like a normal damn parent. But I thought actions spoke louder. I thought showing up was enough. Maybe I wasn't the father he needed, but hell, I was the only one he had. And I did what I could with what I had. But erase the punchline. Jason thought I did nothing. So I decided to give him exactly that. The Monday after graduation, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the red numbers in my checking account, The same numbers that had blinked back at me for the better part of 2 decades, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disappointment. Just stillness. A kind of cold, practical silence that settles in your bones when something's shifted so deep inside you that even yelling feels pointless. I opened my laptop, typed up a short email to the bursar's office, 10 plain words that might as well have been carved into stone. Effective immediately, financial support has ended. Student to be notified directly. No explanation, no apology, not even a signature. Just the kind of finality you save for closing a bank account or shutting off a phone line. I didn't slam the laptop shut or crack open a bottle or throw something at the wall like they do in movies. I just stood up, walked outside, and lit the grill. It was one of those afternoons that sits heavy on your skin, humid enough to feel like you're sweating through your soul. I threw a couple of burgers on the flames, leaned back in my chair, and watched the smoke curl into the sky like it was carrying off the last 22 years of my life. That was the moment I realized something real simple and real ugly. If he wanted to believe he did it all alone, then it was about damn time he proved it. 2 days later, my phone rang. I didn't check the caller ID because I already knew who it was. There's a specific kind of ring to a desperate phone call. It buzzes with this electricity, this panic underneath the ringtone that you can feel in your teeth. I flipped open my phone, held it between my shoulder and my ear, and kept flipping the burgers like nothing was wrong. Dad? Jason's voice cracked on the second syllable. That alone told me everything I needed to know. Hey, kid, I said, nice and calm, watching the juice bubble up through the meat. What's up? Did you cancel the tuition payments? His voice had this sharp edge to it, the kind that cuts deep, because it's not just confusion, it's betrayal. Sure did, I said, as casual as you'd mention picking up milk on the way home. Sent the email Monday. There was this pause on the other end, just long enough for me to flip a patty. Then the storm came. Are you serious? Are you actually serious right now? Jason snapped, and suddenly I could hear the wind through the phone, like he was pacing outside somewhere, probably on campus, probably on the edge of losing his mind. I thought you did it all yourself, I said, letting the words hang there like smoke in the air. Just giving you a shot to prove it. You're being petty, he barked. This is my future you're messing with. You're going to ruin everything I've worked for because your feelings are hurt. Now that made me laugh. Not out loud, not in a cruel way, but the kind of laugh that stays in your chest because it's too bitter to come out. My feelings? That kid had no idea what hurt really looked like. I'd bled for him, starved for him, bent my damn spine until it cracked to make sure he had a chance, and the one time I stepped back, suddenly I'm the villain? I'm not ruining anything, I said. Just stepping aside like you asked. You said you did it all alone. Well, now you really can. You're unbelievable, he said, and then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand for a while, not because I expected him to call back, but because the silence afterward felt heavier than the words that came before it. It wasn't the first time we'd fought, but this time there was something final in the way he hung up. Like maybe a bridge had been torched. Like maybe we were finally standing on opposite sides of a canyon too wide to cross. Later that evening, Uncle Roy showed up unannounced with a 6-pack of warm beer and a box of gas station wings that smelled like they'd been microwaved twice and dropped on the floor. He sat on the back steps, cracked open a can, and looked at me the way only someone who's known your worst moments can look. So, he said, sipping his beer like it was scotch. You finally did it. Did what? I asked, still watching the coals die down in the grill. Cut the cord, he said. Burn the boat. Whatever metaphor makes you feel better. I didn't say anything for a while. Just took a long pull from my own can and stared at the stars. They were faint that night, swallowed up by the haze, but they were still there, silent, constant, indifferent. You think I went too far? I asked. Roy shrugged. You're either a genius or a jackass. Maybe both. I've known you long enough to bet on both. He clinked his can against mine, and we drank in silence like men do when the words are too heavy to carry. The next time I heard from Jason, it wasn't a phone call. It was a knock at my door. It was nearly 11 when I heard the knock, the kind of knock you feel in your bones, sharp and deliberate, like someone hitting the door not just to be let in, but to be heard before the latch even clicks. I'd just finished washing the dinner plates, 2 cracked ceramic ones and a coffee mug stained with years of burned memories, and I was debating whether to pour a second drink or let the silence of the house do its work. When I opened the door, the porch light buzzed above us like a dying wasp, and there he stood, my son, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His hoodie was pulled low over his face, but I could still see the red in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the storm trying to hold itself together. He didn't say anything at first, just stepped onto the porch like he still lived here, like he wasn't the same kid who stood on a stage 2 weeks ago and erased me with a sentence. I didn't move. I just held the screen door open and let the night air creep between us until the silence got too thick to breathe. "You gonna invite me in?" he asked, voice cracked and sharp. "I might," I said, "depending on what the hell you're doing here." That's when it spilled out, fast and desperate, like water from a pipe that finally burst. He told me the scholarship people needed a final tuition payment processed, or else his eligibility would lapse. Some kind of bureaucratic mess with paperwork and unpaid balances. He didn't get into all the details, and frankly, I didn't need them. What I heard was panic. What I saw was fear under all that pride, and what I felt deep down was something ugly starting to rise. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like I'd been the one who cut and ran when he was 7, not his mother, like I was the reason everything felt cold now. "You know what this does to me, right?" he said, stepping forward, voice loud now, edged with anger. "You're punishing me for saying something honest. For telling the truth." I leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark yard, the same patch of dirt where he used to ride that red plastic trike with his helmet 2 sizes too big. I didn't turn to face him when I asked, "Do you think I was a bad father?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the silence do the talking again, and when he finally opened his mouth, it wasn't what I expected. "You were never there. Not really. You were in the room, but not in it. You cared more about money than feelings. You think sacrificing sleep or skipping meals makes you some kind of hero. I needed a dad, not just a wallet with boots." The words hit harder than I thought they would, maybe because part of me had been bracing for something else, an apology, even a thank you, but not that. Not the idea that all the years of struggle, all the nights I came home limping or sick or broken just to keep the lights on, didn't count for anything because I didn't say the right words at the right time. I turned then, slowly, looking him dead in the eye, and said, "You think I didn't want more? You think I didn't want to be there at your recitals, at your meets, or just to sit across from you at the dinner table like some perfect goddamn sitcom dad? I wanted that. I still do. But wanting and being able ain't the same thing. You know how many nights I spent parked down the block from our house, too ashamed to come in because I couldn't afford groceries that week? You know how many jobs I turned down so I could be 10 minutes away from your school instead of 2 states away making double? You think I chose this life?" Jason didn't back down, but something in his face shifted, just slightly, as if the weight of what I said didn't sit right with him, like maybe some part of him had never considered the view from my end of the table. I went back inside without another word, leaving the door open behind me, half hoping he'd follow, half hoping he wouldn't. My hands trembled when I opened the drawer where I kept the checkbook, the same old leather cover I'd been using since before Susan left. The corners frayed, the ink faded. I pulled it out, stared at it for a second, then stopped. Instead of grabbing a pen, I reached further into the drawer, to the back corner where I kept the things I didn't let myself look at too often. I pulled out a folded piece of construction paper, soft at the edges and stained with time. On the front, drawn in big blocky crayon letters, it read, "Best Dad in the World." Inside was a stick figure holding a wrench and a smaller one with messy red hair that was supposed to be Jason. He'd made it for me when he was in 3rd grade, taped it to the fridge for 2 months straight. I walked back outside, handed it to him without saying a word, and waited. He looked at it, squinted like he didn't recognize it at first, and then something cracked. Not a tear, not a full breakdown, but a shift in his face, like the mask he wore was starting to peel. He didn't thank me. He didn't hug me. He just stared at that card, like it was written in a language he'd forgotten. "That kid," I said, voice low, steady, almost cold, "knew something you forgot." He stood there for a moment, silent, card in hand, jaw locked like he wanted to say something but couldn't figure out what it was supposed to be. Then, just like that, he turned and walked down the steps, out into the night without a goodbye. I didn't call after him. I didn't ask him to stay. I just sat down on the porch, card still in my hand, and let the air settle around me like dust on a casket. I thought that was the end of it. Then I got a call from Professor Jennings. It was 3 weeks after that night on the porch, 3 long, heavy weeks of silence echoing between me and my son like we were living in 2 different worlds, neither one willing to cross the space in between, that the phone rang again. But this time it wasn't Jason's number lighting up the screen, it was Professor Jennings. I let it buzz once, twice, almost a 3rd time before I finally picked up, not out of curiosity or eagerness, but because the only thing worse than bad news is not knowing what the hell it is. Professor Jennings had a voice like cardboard and gravel, the kind of voice that sounded like it never laughed unless it was grading someone's mistakes. But that day, it held something different, a sort of hesitant respect. He told me he wasn't supposed to call, not really, but he felt like I ought to know what Jason was doing. I braced myself, expecting some plea for money or a warning that Jason was dropping out or worse, but instead, I heard something I didn't see coming. "He's working," Jennings said, like it was something sacred. 3 jobs, actually. Cafeteria assistant, library clerk, and helping out in the engineering department for extra credit. He's surviving, but just barely. Hasn't missed a class. Hasn't asked for extensions. Something's shifted. I didn't say much, just a grunt or 2, some vague acknowledgement that I'd heard him, but inside, something twisted, something sharp and proud and painful all at once. Not because I was happy, not because he was struggling, but because, for the first time, I felt like maybe he was finally standing on the 2 legs I spent 20 years building under him. The days crawled after that call. I didn't reach out. I didn't check social media or text or snoop like some soft-handed helicopter dad. I just went back to my routine work, coffee, the occasional poker night with Roy, mowing the lawn even when it didn't need mowing. The silence between us didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a necessary distance, like space given to something still taking shape. Then one morning, a Tuesday I think, I came home from a hardware run and saw a box leaning against my front door. No note, no sender name, no knock, no ring, just a plain brown package taped up like it didn't want to be noticed. I brought it inside, sat it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for longer than I should have, like it might explode or open up into something I wasn't ready to see. Eventually, I cut through the tape with my old utility knife and opened the flaps. Inside was a framed photo of Jason, cap, gown, honor cords around his neck, smile stiff but real. Behind him stood the university emblem, clear as daylight, and in his eyes there was something I hadn't seen before, not arrogance, not distance, but gravity. Like life had finally punched him in the gut and taught him to breathe slower. Tucked behind the frame, folded neatly and without any kind of pretense, was a piece of lined notebook paper with handwriting that looked like it was written in one go. No erasures, no second thoughts. I unfolded it and read the words that would stick with me longer than any apology could have. "You didn't help me with anything, but you helped me become someone who could survive without help. I get it now." That was it. No, thank you, no, I'm sorry, no reaching for a hug through written words. Just plain truth, stripped bare and maybe a little bitter. I held the letter in my hands for a long while, then folded it up and put it back where it came from. I didn't cry. I don't do that. I've spent most of my life pushing tears so far down they come out as heartburn or stiff shoulders. But I felt something settle in me, like a weight finding the right place to land after floating around for too long. I took the photo to the garage, walked over to the workbench, where I'd sat countless nights counting quarters and nickels to cover book fees and meal plans. Right above that stained wood and scattered screws, I hammered a nail into the wall and hung the frame. It didn't shine. It didn't sparkle. It just sat there, quiet and proud and real. Maybe I was a bastard for cutting him off. Maybe I went too far. Maybe I should have just swallowed the insult, kept the checks coming, and waited for him to grow up on his own. Or maybe I finally did the one thing he needed most, stepped out of the way and let him fall. Either way, he did it all by himself now, just like he wanted. And as I stood there in the garage, wiping my hands on a rag older than his high school diploma, I thought about how strange it is to love someone enough to hurt them just so they can learn to stand. I didn't get a parade. I didn't get credit. But I got a grown-ass man who knows how to fight for himself. The photo watched me like a witness. I walked outside, pulled the lawnmower from the shed, and let the engine roar to life beneath my hands. Was I right? Was I cruel? I don't know. But the grass still grows, the world keeps turning, and sometimes a father has to let go not because he wants to, but because holding on any longer would only break them both.